Well, Election Day is a little more than 4 months away, and the Trump campaign is trying to restart and reboot their base's enthusiasm. But after a less than full rally in Oklahoma over the weekend, the incumbent may have some trouble at the ballot box come November. Our political analyst, Brian Calfano, joins us now. Brian, thank you so much for being here.
Good to see you, Sarah.
So, Brian, let's talk about President Trump's most recent rally over the weekend in Tulsa.
Yeah.
Not exactly full, right?
Right. No, a bit of a disappointment for the president in the sense that irrespective of whether there was some kind of sabotage going on, there's that story going around the TikTok and all that sort of thing, and folks reserving seats and that didn't show up, or it was just because his supporters were concerned because, frankly, they didn't want to get exposed potentially to COVID-19. It just didn't look good for the president. Obviously, the president likes the big numbers, as he likes to refer to his ratings and the attendance at these rallies. And my goodness, I mean, being a third full, clearly an embarrassment for President Trump on Saturday night.
Definitely. So what is the point of these rallies? Can't he just move them online, or is that even an option for him?
Well, it is. And I think you're going to see Joe Biden go that route in terms of doing as much as he can online. He already is, a lot of fundraising calls and that sort of thing. But President Trump is a little bit of a different political animal because he really is energized by these crowds. I mean, he goes on almost like this presidential stand-up routine that he does. If you watched what he did on Saturday, I mean, he's talking about all kinds of topics that are important to him and really important to a lot of his supporters. And you just don't get that same kind of Donald Trump performance even in a press conference in the White House. You get a lot of combativeness, and maybe you get him making some side comments and getting off track that way. But there is nothing quite like him in front of thousands of supporters, whether it be 6,000 or 19,000 or 50,000. And I think that's exactly why his campaign wants him out and about as much as possible. He's heading to Arizona tomorrow to talk about the border wall and the construction there. Will not be a campaign rally in that sense, but at least it gets him out and about. He's not sitting behind a desk or behind a podium in the White House, where he seems to be much less comfortable. So that's the reason why the White House and his campaign want him as out and about as possible, whether that be with a few supporters or thousands of supporters. Just getting him in a new environment is a good thing for him.
You mentioned his comments that he makes. Do the president's unscripted comments generally help or hurt his chances?
Yeah, in the context of how things are going now, I think they tend to hurt a bit because there are people who may be scratching their heads and saying, yeah, I'm not really sure I want to support him again. They may have supported him in 2016 because they didn't like Hillary Clinton, but they don't necessarily feel confident in his handling of certain issues that have come up. You've got, of course, the protests going on across the country. You've got the pandemic. You've got these criticisms by John Bolton and other former administration officials. And it's not clear that we're seeing this V recovery, that V-shaped recovery they talked about on the economic side of things. And traditionally, Sarah, if you are an incumbent president and you are presiding over an economy that's tanking, you don't get reelected. So all of these elements are coming together now to really present the perfect storm against President Trump. And that really is something I think that these extemporaneous comments, when he's talking about, not having testing happening as rapidly and all that sort of stuff, that he says he was kidding about, right? But those kinds of comments get played and they get taken seriously because he is the president. And that doesn't help when you're talking about that very small sliver of swing voters who may end up deciding this race in some key states.
Okay, so Brian, last week, ahead of the rally in Tulsa, he tweeted out something saying basically that he thinks that this is going to be a really rigged election. He called it our nation's most rigged election in history. Do you think he's kind of saying that to come up with an excuse for why he might not be reelected?
Of course, and this is him hedging his bets. He tried to do the same thing back in 2016, but he ended up winning, right? So this is him repeating this. The problem, of course, is that you've got 50 states plus D.C. who have to actually run this election. And the Secretary of State's offices in those states and the governors, they are very concerned about election fraud, and not in the sense of people necessarily showing up who aren't eligible to voting, but some kind of hacking of computer systems from foreign entities, all these sorts of things. There's lots of money and lots of effort being thrown at trying to make sure that we don't end up having a rigged election. And having the president make these kinds of blanket statements does not help matters at all. I'm sure Republicans and Democrats can agree that that's not helpful in terms of rhetoric.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there anything else you want to add about this most recent rally, what we could expect moving forward?
Well, they're going to try again. And this is going to be the kind of thing where they're going to try till they get it right. But I think people who are pronouncing maybe the end of the Trump presidency at this point, it's a little premature for that because I think once you get Joe Biden out there, out and about as a candidate, and being the gaffe machine that he truly is, you're going to see a tightening up of these numbers. So even though President Trump is looking pretty down now in some of these polls, once Biden is put under scrutiny and has to actually start answering for some things and has to put two words together in an effective way, this is not his strong suit. And in some ways, I think this ends up being a battle between two kind of tired boxers who are just going to end up slugging this thing out at the end. And you're going to have one person winning basically by decision, not a knockout.
So you're saying that it's going to be very close towards the end?
I think so, in the sense that you've got Biden, who probably can't close the deal. Much of that's going to depend on who he picks as a vice presidential nominee. The smart money would be on Kamala Harris out of California, somebody, though, who can really energize the Democrats and can effectively make the kinds of cases against Trump and against Pence that Biden would want to do, but he just can't seem to pull it off, whether it's because something to do with age or other things, other challenges that he has. Even when he's reading off a teleprompter in some of these canned speeches, he's having a hard time following through. And for whatever issues President Trump has in terms of his public speaking, he doesn't have that same kind of inability to at least thread the needle in terms of content.
All right, well, either way, we'll see what happens, right? Well, Brian, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate it.
All right, we'll have more Ozarks Tonight coming up after the break.